My friend has been acting weird since we went camping, but today it got a lot worse. To understand, we need to go back to beginning. We're in our senior year of high school. We live in Portland, Oregon, so we figured for spring break, let's get out the city and spend some quality time together, camping in the wilderness. Something you need to have a concept of beforehand is my friend, Kane, is a very up person. He's energetic, and he's almost always happy. Rarely seen him angry. He's a kind guy who wants to spread kindness, so when I tell you this story, keep that in mind. This all started 3 days ago on the last night of our camping trip. That day I told Kane I was hearing some weird noises in the woods. Birds calling would morph into wolves howling without intermission. When presented with this, Kane said, "Sean, you're just paranoid. You're so used to buses honking and cars' tires screeching, you're overthinking the forest noises." "I don't know, man. It's just freaking me out, that's all." Kane put his hand on my shoulder and gave me the most genuine grin you could ever see. "Calm down, man. We're fine. It's just me and you out here. Let's have some fun." That day, we went fishing at a river on the mountain we were camping on. We ended up swimming, too, but the water was ice cold, so that didn't last long. Kane caught a 8-inch bass, which we ended up cooking for dinner over a fire, along with some canned green beans I had brought. A small dinner. But damn did it feel good to catch your own food. Or in this case, have your friend do it. Fight. After dinner, we retired to our own tents and winded down for bed. While I reached for my overhead lantern, I heard footsteps. They were light, like a coyote's or something that size. They were slow and they circled our campsite. At first, I wanted to reach for the zipper of my tent, but my primal instincts told me that was a bad idea. The footsteps circled until they became closer and heavier. Suddenly, I heard the zip of Kane's tent. My attempt to whisper came out as a sort of yell whisper. "Kane, what the fuck are you doing?" "Checking it out, dipshit, what do you mean?" "But it could be a wolf or something." "I got my deer knife, chill out, you wuss. I'll be fine." It was then I noticed the initial footsteps had ended. It was completely silent. No crickets, birds, nothing. Like every forest animal was anticipating a predator. I heard Kane's footsteps circle the site before departing from hearing range. As I heard his footsteps trail off, a sickening, tightening feeling in my stomach occurred. I waited anxiously until I heard footsteps in the distance. Immediately, I hopped out of my tent, and in the distance, I saw Kane's outline in the shadows. But as he approached, I saw his clothes were torn and dirty. A cut went from the center of his chest off to the side. "Holy shit, Kane, what happened?" He just stared at me with the most empty look I've ever seen in anyone's eyes. "Kane?" My voice went soft and cracked. He could probably tell I was nervous, but he still said nothing. "This isn't funny." "Night," he said immediately, and then retreated to his tent. I couldn't sleep that night. In the morning, we packed up all our camping equipment. I noticed Kane had thrown his bloodied clothes out to the woods and changed. Weirdly, though, he was wearing his swim trunks, but I could still see his boxers, so I knew he wasn't planning on swimming. Well, I didn't at the time. I was too stupid to see the obvious signs that something wasn't right. When we got back into town, he got lost trying to find my house, to the point where I drove because he couldn't even understand how to follow Google Maps or his left from right. Kane would never get mixed up like that, much less forget his left from right. We got back to the house, and my mom had prepared us some food, but Kane refused to eat it. We tried offering something else, but he wouldn't eat anything we had to give him. Then, when I tried to get him to play video games with me, he got confused and angry. He ended up throwing my spare controller and breaking it. Then, when I got distracted, I caught him staring into my younger sister's room. When I yelled at him about it, he said, "I wanted to know what she does when no one is watching," which really freaked me out. I told him he should probably go home. I probably should have told someone about the signs. I should have told my mom he was watching my sister. I should have done something before we got to this point. I have to go to bed, so I'll leave you off at the end of day 1. So we left off where I told him to go home. If you haven't read part 1, please go read that before continuing. That night, I contemplated telling my mom, or his mom. But who would believe me? Oh, my friend is acting weird, and he's probably a skinwalker or something. For the record, I've never held any faith in the supernatural or anything religious. I know little to nothing about that kind of stuff besides baseline info you see on the internet. All I know is they can turn into animals and sometimes even people. I think whatever was out there that night killed Cain and crawled into his body or took the form of his body. Whatever happened, that's not Cain. After that night, I knew that. I woke up in the middle of the night. There was a dog viciously barking outside my house. When I looked outside, I could see someone walking away. I think it was Cain. The next day, I didn't really hear from him. I spent all day hanging out at the house and even invited my girlfriend Kim over. We watched a horror movie and helped my sister with a science project, since her spring break wasn't as long as ours. In the middle of us all building a model of the solar system, easy grade A science project, there was a knock at the door. I got up to answer it and was surprised to see Cain's dad standing at my door. "Hey Joshua, Cain isn't here, what's up?" He had this intense look on his face, like he was about to bite his lip off. "Fuck, sorry." He spoke frantically. "He's really not here?" I stepped outside on the front porch and closed the front door. "What's going on?" Cain kept leaving and coming back home last night. When his mom confronted him about it, he didn't say a word. "Yeah, he was acting." "That's not it, Sean." She got mad and raised her voice a bit, as she tends to do when she's frustrated, and he turned around and smacked her down to the ground. I looked at my friend's dad and felt the desire to vomit everywhere. I wanted to tell him what happened, that I didn't know what was going on, but something was wrong with his son. I had no idea what to say. Anything I could piece together would sound insane. I looked at him. Grim, written all over my face. "I'm so sorry. If there's anything we can do, let us know." He looked at me like he knew I was hiding something, but he simply nodded and walked back to his car. When I walked inside, I felt like fainting. What the fuck was wrong with Cain? He would never hit his mom. They had their struggles, but he loved her more than anyone. I stepped inside my sister's room, and that's when I saw it. A squirrel sat outside the window, perching with its beady black eyes, darting around the room. But when it locked eyes with me, it didn't flinch. My heart skipped a beat before I came rushing at the window, banging at it. It maintained eye contact. When my girlfriend and sister looked over it, finally ran off, and I felt insane. "Babe, what are you doing?" "Why would you scare a squirrel like that?" Not able to come up with a rational explanation, I said the first thing to come to mind. It was acting weird." "What?" My girlfriend raised her eyebrow at me. "I thought it might have rabies or something." It was dismissed, and we finished up my sister's project. That's when I got another knock at my door. This time, it was Kane. Hey, I just saw your dad. What happened with your mom? Who? My gut tightened all over again. Right. It's late, you should get home. Can I stay here? Why? Can't go home. At the speed he responded, it was like he was on drugs. I couldn't stand to see my friend like this. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe something happened in the woods and he's changed, and he needs someone to talk to. Maybe I can help him. I guess so. Kim ended up heading out when he arrived, because the sun was going down. I gave her a kiss on the cheek and squeezed her hand tight before she left. Me and Kane were in my room. I got distracted on my phone as usual. But when I looked up at him, he was staring out, past the hallway into the kitchen, watching my mom. Both times, my mother and sister, it seemed like he didn't have perverted or malicious intent. It was like he was studying them. Hey, Kane. He didn't say anything, but turned his head and fixed his gaze on me. What happened in the woods when we were camping? He looked irritated at the subject being brought up. Don't want to talk about it. Kane, it seems like something bad happened and maybe you should talk about it. For a split second, he gave me a look that made it feel like my friend was back. A look that rationalized the concern I had for him and was ready to talk about it. But then his face returned back to the empty, callous, soulless husk of what used to be my friend. Kane. Quiet. The sudden increase in his volume made me jump. Then my mom appeared in the doorway. That was the only time I've seen him smile since we got back. He turned around and cheerfully said to my mother, "Yeah, just a dumb argument. Sorry for raising my voice." That's when I realized he wasn't talking like Kane would. He was talking like I do, using my mannerisms and tone, specifically the tone I use when speaking to my mother. This shook me to my very core. My mother smiled. "Okay, be nice to each other. You guys have been friends since you were kids." She walked back into the kitchen, and Kane locked eyes with me. "Dude, what the fuck is wrong with you lately?" He just stared at me. I hated this. I wanted to help my friend so desperately. "Kane, please talk to me. I want to help you." "They're going to find out." "What? What are you talking about?" "They all know. You know." I didn't respond, and we both went silent. At the time, I didn't know what he meant. But now I wish I didn't. I wish I never went camping with him. He sat with us for dinner, but didn't eat anything. We all talked about our days while he just watched. Anytime my mom asked him something, he smiled and responded. Anytime her focus wasn't on him, he just stared at all of us, watching the way we ate, the way we talked, the way we got upset. That night, I knew I was not staying the night with my troubled friend. I knew whatever was in my house was a danger to me and my family. But I couldn't do anything. I couldn't fight him. I couldn't tell anyone. So we laid down for bed, and I ignored it and went to sleep. I slept peacefully as you could. My dreams were filled with the estranged themes that have popped up in my life. When I woke up in a panicked sweat, I was met with Kane's eyes soullessly staring into mine, but it wasn't like he was looking at me. It was like he was looking into me. "What the fuck are you doing?" "Trying to, I don't know, figure it out." "Kane, what the fuck is wrong with you?" "Nothing." I couldn't help it. Tears started falling from my eyes. This isn't you. What are you? What do you want? I can't play Kane for long. The smile that stretched across this stranger's face was so disturbing and freakishly inhumane, my brain couldn't even process what was happening anymore. Please get out! Like that, he just left. When I looked out my window, I didn't even see him walking away. The things he was saying weren't making sense. Why the fuck would something take my friend, not even attempt to pretend to be him, and now it's stalking me and my family? I couldn't fit the puzzle pieces together, but I knew it was solemnly up to me. Tomorrow I can catch you up the rest of the way. I have to prepare for what is coming. I'm sure now it has to be a skinwalker, or a changeling. Something that takes people and wears them like masks. Everything I found online points to this. All the weird stuff at the campsite, the way Kane's been acting, it all fits. It all fucking fits. I can't sleep anymore because I know what this means for Kane. He's gone. Really gone. I've spent hours desperately searching for answers, clicking through endless forums and websites until my eyes burned from the blue light. There was this one thing, this tiny sliver of hope about a Navajo healer who might be able to help, but who am I kidding? Once they take your face, it's gone forever. And hell, maybe I'm wrong about everything. Maybe it's not even a skinwalker. The internet's full of lies, and I'm losing my mind trying to separate truth from fiction. I don't know what to do anymore. Kane's gone. Back to the story, how in part I said shit had gotten a lot worse. Yeah, let me catch you up the rest of the way. Kane had left last night. That's when I went on my internet frenzy of collecting information. I still can't figure out what it wants with my family. This is a long shot. It seems as if whatever entity or force took my friend's face was completely unprepared for the complexity of human relationships and the myriad of connections that come with it. As time passed by, more and more people began to notice the oddities surrounding my friend's disappearance. Whatever it may be quickly became aware of the growing suspicion surrounding his behavior. Initially, I believe it was merely trying to learn the nature of human life, perhaps learning how to mimic emotions and social cues in order to fit in. But now it has shifted its focus. Now, I can't shake the feeling that it's on the hunt once more, seeking its next victim, its next face to wear like a mask. The uncertainty is what chills me to the bone. Will it target Kane's family? Or perhaps my own family, who remain blissfully unaware? The thought of it preying on an innocent stranger is equally disturbing. The possibilities are endless. What had me as stumped is what drives a creature to abandon the wilderness. Perhaps the shadows of the forest no longer satisfied its hunger. Hunger can drive animals to odd things. That morning, desperation drove me to some questionable choices. I found myself following instructions from the darkest corners of the internet, stumbling around my house with burning sage like some cut-rate exorcist. I even caught myself browsing sketchy websites for silver bullets, and when you're seriously considering buying ammunition from someone called Wolf Slayer 420, you know you've hit rock bottom. Kim noticed something was wrong before I even worked up the courage to tell her. During our phone call that afternoon, while the bitter smell of sage still hung in the air, her voice carried that edge of worry I'd been dreading. "You're not yourself," she said. I tried to play it cool, brush it off with a laugh, but you can only pretend for so long that your world isn't unraveling. The truth kept clawing its way up my throat, demanding to be heard. I hesitated, my voice barely above a whisper. Kim, I need to tell you something. It's going to sound crazy, but I think something's seriously wrong with Kane. The words tumbled out, a mix of fear and desperation. There was a pause on the other end of the line. For a moment, I wondered if she was still there. What do you mean? Her tone mirrored the turmoil brewing inside me. I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts. I don't know exactly, but ever since we went camping, he's been different. He's been stalking my family, watching me, saying things that don't make any sense. My voice cracked as I forced out the words. Kim, I think he wants to hurt me. The silence that followed was oppressive, weighing heavily on my chest. And then, a soft laugh drifted through the phone, sending a chill down my spine. It started as a gentle, amused sound, but quickly escalated into a maniacal chuckle that made my blood run cold. Sean, don't be silly. Everything is perfectly fine. My heart sank, a sense of unease creeping over me. This wasn't the Kim I knew. Why are you acting like this? I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. You're the one acting weird, Sean, she shot back, her tone dripping with malice. Not me. I felt a shiver run down my spine. This wasn't Kim. It couldn't be. Kim, this isn't you, I said, trying to reason with her. Did Kane do something to you? Sean, everything will click soon. I didn't hesitate. I hung up the phone, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Who could I trust now? If my own girlfriend was under some kind of mind control, how long would it take for whatever was terrorizing me to claim everyone I loved? I dove deeper into my research, desperate for answers. That's when I stumbled upon more legends of skinwalkers, witches in animal clothing with the power to manipulate minds and take on human form. I was in over my head, but I had no choice. I had to stop this before it was too late. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside made me jump. I felt like I was being watched, always. The birds perched on the power line outside my window seemed to be staring at me, their beady eyes boring into my skin. Even my neighbor's dog, once a friendly companion, now seemed sinister, its gaze following me wherever I went. I didn't know how to escape this hell I was trapped in. I was losing my grip on reality, and there was no one to turn to. I tried calling Joshua multiple times, but he didn't answer. A creeping sense of dread whispered in my ear that maybe Kane had already struck, that maybe it had taken one of their faces, and maybe it was already too late. I tried calling Kane, but he didn't pick up either. The silence was deafening, and my mind was racing with even more worst-case scenarios. And then, a message from Diane's phone. Kane's mom. Hi, Sean. My heart skipped a beat as I hesitated, unsure how to respond. Diane? What's up? Haha. Diane? I tried again. Ha ha ha. I knew then that my worst fears had come true. Kane? I typed, but the text said, read, below it, and no reply was sent. The silence was yet again oppressive, a heavy weight that crushed my chest again. I knew that Kane had taken his mom's face, that Kane and Diane were probably dead, with no chance of returning. I collapsed onto my bed, knees pressed to my chest, and my face buried in my hands. The tears flowed like a river, and I wept for what felt like hours. I was losing control of my life, and I knew it. The thought of being helpless, of being unable to save my friend, his family, or even myself, was suffocating. As I sat there, consumed by despair, I realized that these logs were my last hope. If anyone ever saw this, I wanted them to know the truth. Don't go camping. If you do, bring sage, a silver bullet, and some gall, because that's what it'll take to survive whatever is happening to me. I took a deep breath, wiped away my tears, and steeled myself for what was to come. I would do more research, try to find a way to stop this, no matter how slim the chances. And then, my phone rang. Joshua. He didn't say why, but he told me to come to the house immediately. My heart skipped a beat as I hesitated, unsure if I could trust him. But I knew I had to take the risk. I snuck into my mom's room and grabbed the gun she thought we didn't know about, hidden in her underwear drawer. It wasn't a silver bullet, but it was better than nothing. At least, if something happened, I'd be prepared. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of trepidation wash over me. What was waiting for me at Joshua's house? Was it a trap or a chance to finally uncover the truth? I didn't know, but I was ready to face whatever was coming my way. I'm writing this as I'm on my way to Joshua's house, my heart racing with every passing mile. I have no idea what to expect, but I know it can't be good. I'll write more after whatever happens, but for now, I'm praying to whatever God is listening to keep me safe. I'll need it. Oh God, this is so much worse than I thought. I had just arrived at Joshua's house, and my mind is reeling. There are 5 cop cars parked outside, and I can feel a sense of dread creeping over me. I got out of my truck, and that's when Joshua came charging at me like a linebacker, tackling me to the ground. I felt my head hit the concrete, and a searing pain shot through my skull like a migraine mixed with blunt force trauma. As I struggled to catch my breath, Joshua screamed at me, his face twisted in rage. "What the fuck happened to Kane? What do you know, you little shit?" Spit flew from his mouth, hitting me in the face, and I felt a wave of fear wash over me. The police officers rushed over, pulling Joshua off me, but not before he landed a few more blows. "Mr. Dunham, calm down!" one of them shouted, but Joshua was beyond reason. "You know something you're not telling me. You see what he did to my Diane? What did you do to my son?" I couldn't focus on the pounding in my head, not with Joshua's anger and fear radiating towards me like a palpable force. He was right, of course. It was my fault. I didn't stop Kane from going into those woods, and I didn't tell anyone when he started acting strange. Now it's too late, and I'm left to face the consequences. As I looked up, I saw Diane, laid out on the living room floor. She looked peaceful, like she was finally at rest, but that illusion was shattered when I saw the hole in her chest. It was a ragged, brutal wound, with bits of flesh scattered everywhere. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, and I vomited all over the side of the road. The cops picked me up, checking me for a concussion, but I couldn't take my eyes off Diane's body. This was a crime scene, a scene of horror, and I was right in the middle of it. The police asked me if I knew anything, but I hesitated, unsure of what to say. I wanted to tell them everything, but I knew I'd sound crazy. Maybe Kane had already gotten to them too. They asked me if I wanted to press charges against Joshua, but I shook my head. No, that's really not necessary. He's just a hurt husband and father. As I walked up to the car where they'd put Joshua, a cop stuck her head out the window. "Might not be a great idea, champ. He's not well." But I had to try. I looked at Joshua, who seemed broken, confused, and scared. I could relate to that. Look, Joshua, if I did know anything, I would tell you or the police, I said, trying to reassure him. But he just looked at me, his eyes filled with anger and suspicion. You know why Kane hasn't been acting right. I hesitated, unsure of what to say. But then someone shouted from near the house, "Officer Gillis, get over here!" The cop rushed out of the car, leaving me alone with Joshua. That's when I broke, telling him everything. Look, after we went camping, Kane hasn't been right. I think whatever came back wasn't Kane. I'm so sorry, Joshua. I really didn't know this would happen. Joshua's face twisted in rage, and he spat at me. Fuck you. I've lost my wife, and that's all you can give me. My son is some mythical creature. I knew I had to get out of there, fast. You're the only one I can trust, Joshua. I'm going to fix this, I promise. I started walking back towards my truck, but the cops stopped me, telling me I couldn't drive. I had to walk home, feeling like I was being watched, like Kane was already closing in. I'm writing this as I'm sprinting back to my house, my heart racing with every step. I see a crow following me, its black eyes watching me, and I know I'm not being paranoid. Every time I slow down, the bird slows down, and every time I stop, it lands and caws at me, like it's taunting me. I just made it into the house, barricading the windows and door with every piece of furniture I could find. I'm standing facing the door, waiting for whatever is coming next. I can hear a light pitter-patter trail from the front of the porch to the front door, and I know I'm running out of time. Luckily, my mom was at work and my sister was at school, so they were safe and didn't have to watch me go into a psychotic episode. A shadow materialized, Kane's silhouette. But my mother's voice drifted through the door, sweet as honey and wrong as a nightmare. "Sweetie, I'm home early from work. Let me in." The doorknob rattled, each tiny movement like thunder in my ears. "That's not you, Mom." The words barely made it past my lips, each syllable trembling with the fear coursing through my veins. "Don't be ridiculous, honey. Your sister's right here with me." A pause, then, "Come on, you idiot. Open up." My sister's voice chirped, the familiar sound twisted into something that made my skin crawl. Hot tears carved paths down my cheeks, each drop hitting the floor like a gunshot in the silence. My throat closed up as panic clawed its way through my chest. "Get the hell away. You're not real." Then Kim's voice joined the chorus, but it was wrong. Too deep, like someone trying to speak through mud. "Let us in, you moron. We're freezing out here." "Cut the act, Kane. It's middle of summer, you piece of shit. Just leave." The voices merged into something ancient and terrible, a sound that shouldn't exist in our world. My stomach heaved as this thing, this demon, screamed through my door. "Open the goddamn door, Sean! You're making your sister cry, Sean! I'm sick of these stupid games you keep playing!" Terror crashed over me like a tidal wave, drowning out everything else. My body began to shut down, not in the usual fight or flight way, but something deeper and more primal, like some deprived part of my brain decided playing dead was the only option left. But in my gut, I knew that wouldn't save me from what waited on the other side of that door. I pulled the gun out I had tucked in the back lining of my jeans. The figure was banging at the door, to the point where it almost tore the hinges out of the wood, and the doorknob shook so violently, the screws fell out until it dropped, leaving a hole in the middle of the door. I watched as Kane slowly bent down and peered his empty eye through the hole to look directly at me. That's when, without thinking about it for a second, I flicked the safety off the gun, held it up, and shot at the door 4 times before lowering the gun. I heard the thud of his body outside the door. I sighed in relief as I went up to the window, pulling back the dresser that covered it, and peeked outside to see Kane was nowhere to be found. I knew I hit him because I could see liquid all over the porch, but it wasn't blood. It was more like a disgusting black sludge with the viscosity of honey. That's when I saw a bird coming straight for the window. I tried to push the dresser in front of the window, but it was too late. Kane had already crashed through the window. I couldn't look away as Kane, or whatever had possessed Kane, began to change. The transformation was like watching every horror movie I'd ever seen, compressed into 30 seconds. His feathers thinned and melted away, each one dissolving like candle wax, as his body stretched and swelled to human size. The worst part was the sound. The wet snap of wings twisting into arms, bones crackling like kindling in a fire as they forced themselves into new positions. When the teeth burst through his beak, they didn't just appear. They ripped through like nails through rubber, bringing waves of thick, black ooze that dripped between them. By the time it was over, and everything looked normal again, I'd forgotten how to breathe. We were standing there in the middle of my living room. This is when I had stupid, trivial thoughts run through my head, like, why did I never go back to check the campsite? Why did I not even try to reach out or find a Navajo healer? Did I care that little about my friend or about my family? But there he was, the creature that stole my friend's face and used it to kill his own mother and terrorize my loved ones. Why? Why would you do this? I stammered. The being that had once been my friend Kane let out a low, menacing chuckle. The sound sent shivers down my spine, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. It wasn't even trying to mimic Kane's voice anymore. Instead, it spoke in a strained, raspy tone. Lived 100 years, 100 life forms, 100 places. I took a step back, my mind reeling. Okay, why come here then? Nowhere else to go. What do you mean? The being's eyes seemed to bore into my soul. My people, they were coming, hungry. I had nowhere to run until he showed up. I knew exactly what it was talking about. You mean on our camping trip? The being just stared at me, its empty eyes seeming to suck the life out of me. And then, in a voice that was perfectly, eerily Kane's, it said, "Goodbye, Sean." For a second, I thought it was really Kane, that somehow he had managed to break through the creature's control and was saying his final goodbye. What happened next is almost too horrific to describe. I'm not sure I can even type it out, but I have to try. I have to make sure that someone knows the truth. He began throwing up that black sludge everywhere. The first drop hit my floor like tar, viscous and darker than midnight. Then my friend's body convulsed, and everything went to hell. His mouth stretched impossibly wide, a black waterfall of putrid sludge cascading out, bringing with it a stench that made me think of rotting corpses left in summer heat. The liquid spread across my hardwood floors like living oil, seeking corners, creeping under furniture. That's when I heard it. The wet crack of bones shifting beneath skin. His ribcage moved like something was pushing out from inside, each snap echoing through my living room like gunshots. The bones didn't just break, they exploded outward, each new puncture weeping that same dark filth. The thing that used to be my friend sat there, a human colander dripping corruption, while my living room transformed into a lake of that same corruption. The bile rose before I could stop it, my stomach turning inside out as I struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. Maybe it was the concussion, or what was before my very eyes. From the ragged holes in his chest, pale fingers emerged like pale worms after rain. But these weren't burrowing down. They were reaching out. They curled around the edges of his flesh, and then came the sound. I'd torn paper all my life, but this was different. Wet. Wrong. The sound of skin giving way was like wet leather being slowly shredded. Each horrible tear punctuated by a sound I can only describe as a sick, wet pop. The fingers worked methodically, clumsily, like a child opening a Christmas present in the dark. Only this gift was my friend's chest, being peeled open like a blooming flower made of meat. The scene before me defied reality itself. Cain's body split open like a molting insect, but what emerged wasn't some creature or beast. No, it far much worse. A figure crawled out, leaving behind Cain's empty flesh like a discarded coat. My heart stopped. Standing there, dripping with dark sludge that seemed to evaporate into nothing, was me. Every detail was perfect. The same clothes, the same slightly disheveled hair, even the small scuff on my left shoe. Death would have been a mercy compared to this moment. I'd thought that since this entire thing began, but now, staring into my own eyes from across the room, I knew it with crushing certainty. "Everything's going to be okay," he said calmly to me, in my voice, perfectly. There was no deviation or falter. This creature had perfectly become me. I didn't even know if I was myself anymore. I made a beeline for my room. Everything I own is pressed against my bedroom door. My dresser, my desk, even my mattress. But I can hear the wood starting to splinter, and I know it's not enough. It was never going to be enough. Cain's words still echoed in my head. None of this made sense. I couldn't save Cain. I couldn't save his mom. I couldn't save his dad from his descent into madness. I failed them all. "Mom, Shelley, I'm writing this for you. I love you. I'm sorry I couldn't stop this. God, I'm so sorry. And Kim, if you're still you, if that thing hasn't gotten to you yet, I need you to know something. That fight we had, when you said I was losing it, you were right. I just wish I'd been wrong. My hands are shaking as I type this, but you all need to know. Stay out of the woods. When you hear those sounds, those impossible sounds, run and watch your friends. Watch them closely, because if they change, it happens fast. One moment they're themselves, and the next, well, it's something wearing their skin. The door frame is giving way. The hinges are tearing from the wall. I can hear it breathing on the other side. If you're reading this, if you ever meet someone calling himself Sean H. Leroy, that's not me. But by then, it's probably already too late for you. The door's splitting down the middle now. May God help us all, because nothing else can. Roger disappeared without a trace, his car still in the driveway, and not a single thing taken from the house, Mr. Whitaker said in a gruff voice. The weight of his words lingered in the air, like a distant echo of something forgotten. My wife, Ilara, and I had just moved into a new house in a quiet town, nestled in a new state, far from the suffocating grip of our hyper-religious parents. They hated the idea of us living together unmarried, and their disapproval had turned crazy, leaking our phone number and address to their church members, who bombarded us with calls and letters day and night. It became too much. We scraped together every dollar we could and found what seemed like a miracle. A house for sale at an unbelievable price. The young couple selling it had been unusually pushy, eager to close the deal, but we couldn't pass it up. A fresh start away from everything we'd left behind felt like the lifeline we desperately needed. Now, here we were, having dinner with Mr. and Mrs. Whitaker, an older couple who had lived in the neighborhood for decades. They'd invited us over as a gesture of welcome, and we were glad to have someone familiar in this unfamiliar place.
He was the owner before the young couple you bought from, Mr. Whitaker continued, swirling his wine. They got it cheap, probably because the bank didn't know what to do with it. Roger was gone, just like that. Funny though, those kids only lasted about a year before they left, too. But I don't judge or pry. He took a long sip of wine, his eyes flicking briefly toward Mrs. Whitaker. Ilara reached for my hand under the table, her grip tightening slightly. "Did they ever find out what happened to him?" she asked, her voice tinged with hesitation. He shook his head slowly. "Nah, never. It was as if he just stopped existing one day." The room felt heavier. Mrs. Whitaker, sensing our unease, spoke up with a soft smile, her tone gentle, as though trying to smooth over the cracks Mr. Whitaker had widened. "Oh, love, don't let him scare you. Roger was a strange man, always kept to himself. It's a big world out there. He probably just went back to his hometown or started over somewhere else. Nothing ever happens here. It's a beautiful, quiet town." Their words stayed with us long after we left that evening, even as we thanked them for their hospitality. It was comforting to know someone nearby, but the story lingered in my mind. As the days passed, we settled further into the house, falling deeper in love with its quirks and the freedom it represented. It was the clean slate we had dreamed of. 3 months passed, and life felt easy, refreshing even. But then, one evening, everything changed. We were getting ready for dinner at a little local restaurant we'd affectionately nicknamed Our Spot. I was rifling through the clothes in our bedroom closet, searching for something decent to wear, when I noticed it. A small, faded, pale blue door, no taller than 4 feet, stood behind the hanging jackets as though it had always been there. Its wood was worn and cracked, its paint peeling to reveal darker, older layers beneath. My hands froze mid-motion. Time seemed to stall as I stared at it, my mind grappling with the sheer impossibility of its presence. "Ilara!" I called louder than I intended. "Baby, come here!" She appeared moments later, wrapping her arms around me from behind in a playful hug. "What is it?" Her words trailed off as she followed my gaze to the door. "What the hell?" she whispered, stepping closer. We stood there in silence, staring at it. We had been living in this house for months. I had used this closet every day. There was no way we could have missed this. "It's gotta lead to storage or something," I said, my voice shaky, trying to rationalize what I saw. "Maybe a heater?" Ilara's face was tight with unease. "Finn, no. There's no way we wouldn't have noticed this, even when we first moved in. It wasn't here."
I reached out and pulled the door open. It swung silently, its hinges unnervingly smooth. On the other side was a small, dimly lit room, no larger than a child's bedroom. A single bulb dangled from the ceiling, its weak glow barely illuminating the space. The walls were plain and gray, with no shelves or furniture, just emptiness. "Looks like it's just extra storage," I muttered, unsure even as I said it. Alara crossed her arms and shrugged, but the tension in her body told me she wasn't convinced. "I don't know, Finn. I don't like this. How could we have missed it?" We didn't know what to make of it, but as the days passed, it became easier to ignore. The door was just there, a strange, inexplicable feature of the house we tried to dismiss. But a week later, everything changed again. Alara was at work, and I was home alone, tidying up the bedroom. I reached into the closet to hang a shirt, and my hand froze midair. The door was gone. Instead, the wall behind the clothes was smooth and beige, as though the door had never existed. My heart raced as I pushed the clothes aside, running my hands over the surface. "Where is it?" I whispered to myself, knocking against the wall in disbelief. The absence of the door felt more unnatural than its presence had. By the time Alara got home, I had turned to the only thing I could rely on: beer. When she walked through the door, I sat in the kitchen, nursing my third one. "Tough day," she teased, dropping her bag by the counter. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," I mumbled, shaking my head. "I just have to show you." As I led her down the hallway to our bedroom, her face softened, and curiosity flickered in her expression. But as we reached the middle of the hallway, we both froze. There it was again, the pale blue door, standing where it absolutely should not have been. Its faded paint and cracked wood seemed to mock us. We exchanged a look, a shared moment of disbelief that we couldn't put into words. Slowly, I turned back to the door. Without waiting, I pulled it open. This time, the door revealed a small study. An old wooden desk sat at the center, a single candle on top, casting flickering shadows across the walls. Above, a narrow staircase spiraled upward, lined with bookshelves crammed with hundreds of dusty volumes. "Holy," Alara began. "Shit," I finished. We stood at the threshold, too curious to leave despite our confusion. The room exuded an eerie beauty. The desk, scratched and weathered by time, seemed to whisper stories of the past. The candle's light danced across the room, casting an inviting yet mysterious glow that beckoned us further inside. We were bookworms, through and through, and whatever questions we had about the door and its impossibility faded as our love for text took over. Without hesitation, we moved to the shelves, fingers trailing across the worn spines of novels and tomes. The books were familiar, yet different. I pulled out a copy of The Return of the King, the final volume of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and flipped to the ending, eager to relive one of my favorite climactic moments. But instead of Frodo's triumphant destruction of the ring, I found a dark twist, Sauron reclaiming it, plunging Middle-earth into eternal darkness under his reign. My breath caught in my throat. "Alara, these endings, they're not right." She glanced up from a worn copy of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, her brow furrowed. "You're kidding," she said, though her tone betrayed her disbelief. She flipped through the book,
her face growing more unsettled as she read. In this version, Alice never returned home. Instead, she became trapped in Wonderland, the once whimsical world turning dark and cruel as she realized she was part of an endless nightmare. It wasn't just those books. To Kill a Mockingbird ended with the town succumbing to its worst instincts, Atticus ostracized, Scout left alone in a place consumed by hate. Each book we read carried the same unnerving thread. Familiar stories twisted into something dark and hopeless. We couldn't explain it. The books looked authentic, and the writing matched the author's voices, but the content wasn't right. Desperate for answers, we took a few of the books to a local bookstore. The owner was intrigued but skeptical, her raised brow suggesting she thought we were playing a prank. It didn't matter. This was the late 80s, and there was no internet to search for answers. As days turned into weeks, the pale blue door became part of our lives. We'd visit the study often, reading the altered books late into the night, our conversations circling back to our differences. The strangeness of it all became our new normal, until one day, the house offered something new. While rummaging through the shelves in the study, I discovered a hidden panel behind the desk. Inside was an old, withered book with no title or author. Its leather cover was cracked and faded. The book smelled of mildew and age, and as I opened it, I found a collection of dark, grim fairy tales I had never heard of. One story stood out, its words lingering in my mind like a faint echo. That night, as we lay in bed, I read it to Alara. In a realm where reality's edges softly fray, a hidden sanctum veiled by twilight exists. Here, the waters, clear as mirrors, do not reflect the heavens, but a void teeming with whispering stars. Light and darkness perform a delicate ballet of shadows and luminescence, revealing and obscuring truths, spinning from unseen energies. This domain fluctuates between tranquility and a silent prison, resonating with the cosmic whispers of those drawn to explore its mysteries. The grand observatory above once pierced the celestial veil, its lens aligning mortal fates with the arcane dance of stars and shadowed voids. Below, the mirrors do more than reflect. They capture the very essence of those who dare gaze into them, holding echoes of souls adrift in time and space. As the sanctuary breathes with the quiet sighs of ancient walls, it watches with an unblinking, omniscient gaze. Hidden in the empty spaces, a ravenous entity feeds on the hushed fears and secret desires of those ensnared by its ancient allure. Ilara stared at me with wide eyes as I jotted the words down on a scrap of paper. "What do you think it means?" she whispered. "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't know what any of this means. Do you think we should tell someone?" She hesitated, then suggested, "The Whitakers. Maybe they'll believe us, or at least see it with their own eyes." It was a good idea. The following weekend, we invited the Whitakers over for dinner. After a pleasant meal, we gave them a tour of the house, steering them toward the hallway where the door was. Alara and I exchanged a nervous glance as we approached, but when we turned the corner, we froze. The door wasn't there. All we saw was the plain beige wall, unremarkable and innocuous. Ilara and I tried to mask our shock, plastering on fake smiles as the Whitakers complimented the house. After they left, though, we were at a loss. "The house," Ilara whispered. her voice trembling. It's messing with us. We stayed up late that night, arguing over what to do. Were we going crazy? Was the house truly supernatural? Should we leave? But even as the fear grew, we couldn't deny the house hadn't harmed us. Not yet.
Our argument was cut short by a sound, a distorted creak, like a door opening through static. It echoed faintly from the living room. We walked in cautiously, and there it was again. The pale blue door. This time, it stood behind the television. Its wood faded and cracked, the edges glinting faintly in the dim light. I wish I could say I was scared, but at that moment, I was consumed by curiosity. I moved the TV aside, gripped the handle, and pulled the door open once more. It led to a dark observatory, a room unlike anything I had ever seen. The air felt colder here, sharper. A massive, antique telescope stood at the room's center, surrounded by desks cluttered with star charts and scattered notes. Planets I didn't recognize hung suspended from the ceiling, their surfaces glowing faintly in the moonlight that streamed through the domed windows. "Oh," Ilara murmured, her voice tinged with awe. We explored the room in silence, our unease momentarily replaced by wonder. The telescope, though ancient in design, was shockingly functional. I peered through the lens, expecting familiar constellations, but the stars weren't ours. The sky beyond the telescope was alien, a canvas of unnatural phenomena. A black star pulsed faintly in the distance, its void-like surface swallowing the surrounding light. Nearby, a shattered planet's exposed core glowed with an eerie, molten heat, its fractured surface hinting at cataclysmic destruction. Adjacent to this desolation, another planet teemed with life, but not as we know it. Its surface writhed with chaotic, erratic appendages, moving with deliberate, unsettling intent. "Ilara," I whispered, stepping back from the telescope. "This isn't our sky." She took her turn at the lens, her breath catching. Our unease grew palpable. Whatever this observatory was intended to reveal, it showed us vistas we were never meant to see, scenes from a cosmos where the laws of nature were grotesquely twisted. As the reality of these discoveries settled in, the lines between what was real and what was part of the house's mysterious influence blurred. The telescope revealed sights that should have been awe-inspiring, but instead filled me with a sense of smallness, like I was staring at something I wasn't meant to see. I couldn't stop drawing them, charting them out as if mapping the skies might somehow make sense of it all. One night, while lying awake, the distorted creak of the door returned. This time, it came from our bathroom. I shook Ilara awake, and together, we walked to the bathroom. There, embedded in the shower wall, was the pale blue door again, its wood as worn and faded as before. I hesitated for a moment before pulling it open. We stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, with a soft, white glow emanating from nowhere and everywhere, all at once. Large mirrors lined the walls on either side, their surfaces pristine at first glance. The floor beneath us was cold, reflecting the light like polished obsidian. There was a path forward, leading into the unknown. As we walked, the mirrors began to shift. At first, they were normal reflections of ourselves moving through the space. But then, they started to change. Some mirrors stretched tall and thin, while others were jagged and cracked. One showed my reflection lagging slightly behind me, like it was struggling to keep up. Another displayed me smiling faintly, only I wasn't smiling. "Alara," I said nervously, my eyes darting to her reflection, but she wasn't beside me in the glass. I turned quickly, relieved to see her still there, but she was frozen, staring into a mirror. "Finn," she said softly, her voice shaking. "You're not in this one." The longer we walked, the more surreal it became. The mirrors began reflecting impossible things, hallways that didn't exist, and scenes from our childhoods. One mirror showed me as a child, standing alone in a dimly lit room. My heart raced as I approached a particularly distorted mirror at the end of the hallway. There, a cracked mirror lay under a flickering light, casting an uneven, stuttering glow. From a distance, it was hard to make out the details, but a dark, menacing presence seemed to crowd the surface. As I drew closer, I heard a muffled voice. It was mine, coming from the other side of the glass. My own reflection was pressing its face against the mirror, sobbing uncontrollably. "You've got to help us," it sobbed, its voice muffled, yet unmistakably my own. "Alara, are you seeing this?" I said, not taking my eyes off the reflection. When she didn't respond, I turned to her. She was transfixed by a mirror, where her own reflection crouched in the fetal position. "We're trapped in here," her reflection whispered. "It won't let us out." The air grew heavy and thick with an overwhelming sense of dread. As we backed away, the mirrors around us began to shift again. The reflections weren't ours anymore. They cried, their sobs filling the room, then laughed, a chilling, hollow sound that echoed endlessly. And then, silence. That's when the lights began to go out, one by one, starting from the far end of the hallway. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Alara's hand. We bolted back toward the door, the darkness chasing us, swallowing the mirrors and the path behind us. The sound of shattering glass filled the air, though nothing broke. We stumbled through the door and slammed it shut, gasping for air. "What the fuck is with this house?" I said between breaths. "I don't know," Alara said, her voice trembling. "But I'm starting not to like it. That was too much." The pale blue door stayed in the bathroom for weeks after that. We avoided it by using the guest bathroom instead. It became a symbol of unease, a thing neither of us wanted to confront. The house felt different now, less like a curiosity and more like a trap. We talked about selling it, about leaving everything behind, but we always stopped short of actually making plans. A part of us didn't want to admit how deeply the house had gotten under our skin. One day, as I was hanging up clothes in our bedroom closet, I froze. There it was again, the pale blue door, standing exactly where we'd first found it. I called for Alara, and she joined me, her expression mirroring my own apprehension. "What do you think it leads to this time?" I asked. "Are you serious?" she replied. "It could be anything. A twisted garden, another world, maybe a theater showing some warped version of movies we love. Who knows? Should we open it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Alara bit her lip, her curiosity warring with her fear. I could see it in her eyes. She wanted to know as much as I did. "Maybe just a peek," she said finally. I nodded and pulled the door open. It swung silently, as it always did. The room beyond was eerily reminiscent of the first room we had found, but this time, there was no ceiling,
No walls. The single light bulb lay on the ground, casting a faint, lonely glow. The floor beneath us was like glass, perfectly smooth and reflective. As I stepped inside, the sound of my footsteps broke the silence. Splish, slosh, plop.
It was like stepping on a shallow puddle, though no water clung to my shoes. Ilara followed me, and together, we walked into the void. The vibrations from our steps rippled outward, distorting our reflections on the floor.
We walked for what felt like hours, the light from the bulb growing fainter with each step. Our curiosity outweighed our fear, and we decided to return the next day better prepared. We planned to tie a rope to an anchor in the closet and bring a flashlight to see how far we could go. The next day, we hooked up the rope and ventured further into the abyss, holding each other's hands. The flashlight wasn't much use, but it gave us a small sense of security as we continued deeper. Every now and then, we looked back to see the dwindling light from the door, a tiny beacon in the vast darkness. Splish, slosh, plop. The sound of our steps on the wet-sounding floor filled the void. I shook my head, trying to catch my breath, but before I could respond to Ilara's inquiry about the size of this place, I turned back toward the door. My heart stopped. The light spilling from the doorway was dimming, shrinking until it vanished completely. The sound of the door closing echoed like a gunshot in the silent expanse, leaving my ears ringing. I froze, paralyzed by fear. Then, without warning, the bulb shattered. Glass sprayed across the floor, plunging us into complete darkness. My flashlight flickered once before dying, leaving only the sound of our ragged breathing to fill the void. Then, behind us came a sound. It moved slowly, wetly, like something dragging itself through thick, viscous mud. The squelch of movement sent a chill up my spine. Just as the noise ceased, a deafening splash echoed as though something massive had dropped into the water. Squelch, slosh, plop. "Ilara, run!" I screamed, grabbing her hand. The air behind us grew warmer and more stifling, a sign that something was rapidly closing the distance. We ran, following the rope as best we could. The faint tremors beneath our feet were the only reassurance that we were moving in the right direction. My mind raced, and panic blinded me to everything except the desperate need to escape. The splashing grew erratic and violent, as did whatever it was gained on us. "Jesus Christ! Keep going, Ilara!" I screamed, my throat raw. The rope snapped, leaving us directionless momentarily, but we stumbled forward. Then, finally, we slammed into the door. We pushed it open and spilled into the closet. I threw my body weight against the door, desperate to close it, but it wouldn't budge. Something on the other side was pushing back, clawing, fighting to keep it open. A sharp, searing pain shot through my shoulder as its claws tore into me, the heat behind the door unbearable now. Blood ran down my arm, soaking my shirt. "Go back to hell, you fucker!" Ilara screamed, throwing herself against the door to help me. It became a brutal struggle, one side pulling, the other pushing, a horrific tug-of-war for control. The thing clawed at me again, deeper this time, and I screamed, a mix of pain, fear, and raw desperation. Its guttural, animalistic wails echoed through the door, and then, suddenly, the resistance stopped. The door slammed shut with a force that shook the closet. We collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air. The silence was deafening for a moment, then broken by a loud bang against the other side of the door. Whatever it was still there, throwing itself against the wood, trying to break through. Each impact made the walls tremble. "Ilara, let's go," I said, clutching my bleeding shoulder. She helped me to my feet, and we exited the house. That was the last night we ever spent there. We tried everything. We reported a break-in to the police, but when they inspected the house, the door was gone. There was no evidence, no explanation. Frustrated and fearful, we stayed with the Whitakers for a few nights, then in cheap motels, and sometimes even in our car. The thought of burning the house crossed our minds more than once, but something stopped us. Maybe fear or guilt. The door became more capricious as the days passed, appearing in unexpected places with growing urgency. It would show up under our bed, on the ceiling, behind mirrors. Initially quiet, with faint knocking that escalated into loud, desperate banging. The encounters became too frequent, too terrifying to ignore. Eventually, we put the house up for sale. We were young and broke, and the house was all we had. It became harder to justify the truth, even to ourselves. We told the realtor we were relocating, and that it was too much of a house for us. And when the offer came, a young couple with a little girl no older than 6, we accepted. As we emptied the house, the door appeared less and less. The banging and the faint knocking all stopped as we packed. But even as we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching us go. That was years ago. Ilara doesn't talk about it anymore, but it never left me. I've carried the weight of what we did and left behind. A few months ago, I looked up the address on Google Earth. The house is still standing. In the street view image, there's a family unloading boxes, a man and woman smiling, with 2 kids playing in the yard. If you ever stumble upon a door that seems out of place, a door that leads to realms beyond the grasp of your understanding, to dimensions that twist and shatter reality, don't open it. Some doors are not meant to be opened. It started with a Craigslist ad. Room for rent, $400 month, utilities included. No pets, no loud noises after 10 p.m. I was desperate. My job barely covered my bills, and I couldn't stomach another month of sleeping in my car. The place seemed perfect, too perfect, honestly. A fully furnished room in a nice neighborhood for $400. I should have questioned it more, but desperation has a way of silencing your instincts. The landlord, Mr. Harlan, was a wiry old man with a stooped posture and a voice that barely rose above a whisper. When he showed me the house, everything seemed normal, except for one thing: the door at the end of the hallway. It was different from the other doors in the house, thicker, with no handle or visible hinges. A faint scratching noise came from behind it, like branches brushing against glass, even though there were no trees near that side of the house. "What's in there?" I asked, pointing at the door. Mr. Harlan's face darkened. "That's not your concern. The rent is cheap for a reason. Don't go near it. Don't touch it. And above all, don't listen to it." I should have walked away right then, but I didn't. I moved in the next day. The first few nights were quiet. The house was eerily silent, but I chalked it up to Mr. Harlan being old and reclusive. The door at the end of the hallway didn't bother me much until the fourth night.
That was the first time I heard the whispering. At first, I thought it was Mr. Harlan talking to someone. But when I crept out of my room, I realized it was coming from the strange door. The whispers were soft and rhythmic, like a lullaby sung in a language I didn't understand.
I pressed my ear to the door, and for a moment, the whispers stopped. Then, clear as day, I heard my name. Michael. I stumbled back, heart pounding. I convinced myself I was hearing things and went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep. The next morning, I asked Mr. Harlan about it. He looked at me with a mix of pity and fear. "I told you not to listen," he said. "That room, it's not empty." I pressed him for answers, but he refused to say more. The whispering continued every night, growing louder and more insistent. By the seventh night, it wasn't just whispers. I started hearing knocks, faint at first, but steadily growing louder. It sounded like someone, or something, was trapped inside, pounding on the door with frantic desperation. "Let me out," a voice begged one night. It sounded like a woman. The next night, it sounded like a child. "Michael, please," it whimpered. "It's so cold." I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. My days became a haze of paranoia, and my nights were consumed by the whispers, the knocks, and the voices. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I waited until Mr. Harlan left for his weekly grocery trip. Armed with a crowbar, I approached the door, my heart hammering in my chest. The whispers stopped as I got closer, replaced by a low, guttural growl. "Don't," the voice said. It didn't sound human anymore. I hesitated, but something inside me, curiosity, stupidity, or a mix of both, drove me to wedge the crowbar into the edge of the door and pry it open. The moment the door cracked open, the lights in the house flickered and went out. A blast of freezing air hit me, carrying with it a foul stench like rotting meat. Inside the room, there was nothing but darkness. Not just the absence of light, but a suffocating, living void that seemed to reach out for me. And then I saw them. Eyes, dozens of them, red and unblinking, staring at me from the darkness. A hand shot out of the void, long and skeletal, its fingers impossibly long and sharp. It grabbed my wrist, its touch ice cold and burning at the same time. "Thank you," the voice said, no longer pleading, but triumphant. I screamed and pulled away, slamming the door shut with every ounce of strength I had. The whispers immediately started again, louder and more chaotic, like 1,000 voices screaming in unison. Mr. Harlan found me huddled in a corner of the living room when he got back. He didn't say anything, just helped me up and handed me a glass of water. "I told you not to listen," he said, quietly. I moved out that night, leaving behind all my belongings. A week later, I drove past the house. The windows were boarded up, and a "for sale" sign was staked in the yard. I never went back, but sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone in my new apartment, I hear faint whispers coming from the closet, and they know my name.
It started off just doing small things when we were dating. Honestly, it was a joke. But when I realized how easily he believed me, well, I just couldn't resist. We were drinking together one night and having the best time. The next morning, he woke up hungover. I jokingly said, "When's breakfast?" He had a confused look on his face. "Oh, never mind. You were drunk when you said you'd make me breakfast in bed." His face changed. He was pretending to remember. "I know. Just let me shower quickly." He rolled out of bed and immediately got into the shower. As I heard the water running, a smile spread across my face. Then I slowly began escalating over the years. It was honestly all in good fun, I promise. Asking him why he didn't do a chore that was usually mine. Reminding him of certain things he said. He went along with it. Every single time. I was having too much fun. I finally took it a bit further, just to see when he'd finally catch on. He came home from work one day. There was only about 1 glass of wine left in the bottle. It was gifted to us. Nothing we'd buy ourselves. He asked, "Honey, do you mind if I finish that wine?" "I'm sorry. I'll get you some of your usual tomorrow." I smiled warmly. "Of course, go ahead." It was exactly how I thought it would go. He poured the glass, left the empty bottle on the counter, and retreated downstairs to his office, where he plays video games. About an hour went by. I knew he'd be coming upstairs for dinner soon. I took the empty wine bottle and hid it inside a grocery bag inside the cleaning closet, behind everything. As I did this, I retrieved the brand new bottle of the exact same wine and put it straight into the freezer so it would look chilled. I continued to cook dinner as usual. After about 20 minutes, I pulled the bottle out of the freezer. It was the perfect temperature. I opened the cork as quietly as I could, even though I knew his headset was on. Now, obviously, I knew it couldn't just be right full. That would be too obvious. I began to chug the wine straight out of the bottle, and I was definitely tipsy. Then I poured myself a glass of wine and left the bottle with about half a glass of wine on the counter, exactly where he left the empty bottle. I finished plating dinner and heard him come up the stairs. I became giddy. I couldn't wait to see if he would finally catch on to me. He approached me and gave me a kiss. He looked down at the wine glass in my hand, absolutely puzzled. "Did you get more wine?" "No. You asked if you could have half of what was left and left the rest for me. I wanted to leave you a little bit, though." I gestured to the almost completely empty wine bottle. "I know you had a long day at work." He was bewildered. I almost couldn't contain myself. "I swear I finished the..." He trailed off, still looking at the bottle. I said. He just shook his head and blinked a few times. "Nothing. I guess I did have a long day." "Thank you, honey." He smiled and kissed me again. I smiled back. This is exactly what I wanted. About a month passed. I couldn't do things too closely together. That might raise suspicion, and I couldn't have that. It was early morning on Friday. He was going on a business trip today and would return home on Sunday. I make coffee for my husband every single morning. I always loved to do it for him. For as long as I've known him, he drank his coffee black, always teasing me for putting sugar in mine. I slowly dumped the vial I had hidden in my pocket into his cup of coffee and stirred it in. He came to the kitchen, grabbed the coffee from me, and gave me a big kiss. "Thanks, honey." I smiled and turned back to the coffee maker. How stupid did he think I was?
I knew exactly what this business trip was. I found his dirty little messages with that woman a few months ago. He took a sip of his coffee and made a face. "Did you put sugar in this?" he asked. "Yes. Sorry, did I put too much?" I asked innocently. "I don't like sugar in my coffee." "What are you talking about? You always take a teaspoon of sugar in your coffee," I stated. "I'm sorry. Let me remake it for you." I reached for the mug, and he pulled it closer to himself. "I did it. I think I finally drove him crazy enough to question every aspect of himself." "No, I'm sorry." He smiled, but it was fake. I smiled back as he drank the coffee. He grabbed his briefcase once he was finished, kissed me on the cheek, and said he'd see me in a couple days. I know he doesn't like his coffee sweet, but that's not my concern anymore. I don't have anyone else to talk to about this. I don't have any friends, family, or even acquaintances. When I ran away with Dan, I thought I was moving towards a better part of my life. I was going to be more grand, more promiscuous, and more exotic. But I can't. I arrived at the house just after dusk. It was smaller than I remembered, hunched beneath a sky the color of ash. The realtor had called it quaint, but now all I saw was decay. The paint, once white, peeled like dead skin, curling back from the wood in long, brittle strips. The windows were clouded with dirt, like they hadn't been touched in years. I wanted peace, solitude, but as I stood there, staring at the house, I felt the air grow heavy, pressing in on me. Grief does strange things to your mind, I thought. I hadn't been myself since Dan's accident. His death left a gaping hole inside me, and this place, this forsaken house, was supposed to be a refuge, a place to escape, to grieve in silence. But the longer I looked at it, the more I felt something was wrong. I shook off the feeling, telling myself it was just the exhaustion. I dragged my suitcase inside and shut the door, the echo of the slam too loud in the empty rooms. The house smelled like damp wood and old memories, stale and suffocating. I unpacked slowly, my hands numb, mind drifting. That first night, I slept fitfully, wrapped in Dan's old sweatshirt. The wind outside howled like a wild animal, scratching at the windows. I thought I heard footsteps in the hallway around midnight, slow, deliberate. But when I forced myself out of bed to check, there was nothing. Just silence, thick and oppressive. By morning, I convinced myself it had been a dream. Days bled into each other. I wandered the empty rooms, the floors creaking beneath my weight, each groan sounding like the house's whispering voice. Objects started disappearing, small things at first. A spoon, a pen, my keys. I brushed it off, telling myself I was just forgetful. Grief does that to you. I'd forget my own name if I didn't say it out loud sometimes. But the mirror, that was harder to ignore. It started with glances, catching the corner of my reflection when I wasn't looking for it. I'd be in the kitchen, washing dishes, and out of the corner of my eye, I'd see something move in the hall mirror. At first, I thought it was just my reflection, delayed somehow, but it wasn't. One night, as I passed the mirror, I saw her, me, standing there, staring back. Only she wasn't copying me. I froze, my heart thudding painfully in my chest. My reflection stood still, her face slack, eyes wide and dull. She was waiting, watching. I reached a trembling hand toward the glass, but before I could touch it, she moved. Not a blink, not a shift in weight, just a sudden, violent jerk. Her hand shot up to the glass, slamming against it with a sickening thud. I screamed and stumbled back, but when I looked again, my reflection was normal. A terrified, pale version of myself. I backed away, avoiding the mirror for the rest of the night. Every muscle in my body wound tight, waiting for something to happen,
but nothing did. Not yet. The next day, I started hearing the voice. It whispered, faint at first, almost like a breeze, but then it grew louder, clearer. It was Dan. I was sure of it. His voice, soft and familiar, coming from the walls, the floors, the cracks in the wood. He was calling me, telling me he wasn't gone, that he was trapped here, with me. I wanted to believe it. God, I wanted it so badly. The grief in me ached, tearing at the seams. I spent hours sitting in the dark, listening for him, begging for more. But all I got were whispers, taunting, cruel. The voice turned from gentle to accusing, blaming me for his death, telling me I had abandoned him. "You let me die," he hissed through the walls. "You should be with me. Come back to me." I tried to shut it out, but it followed me from room to room. The objects that had disappeared started showing up in strange places. On the bed, in the fridge, inside my shoes. Things I didn't even own appeared in the house. An old pocket watch, a child's stuffed bear, a photograph of someone I didn't know. Their eyes scratched out. The mirror was the worst. Every time I passed it, she was there, my reflection. But she wasn't me anymore. Her eyes followed me, tracking my movements. She smiled when I wasn't looking, a cold, mocking grin that stretched too wide. I tried covering the mirror with a sheet, but every time I left the room, the sheet would be on the floor when I returned, the glass gleaming as if nothing had been there at all. By now, I was hardly sleeping. The voice never stopped. My reflection never looked away. Then, last night, it happened. I woke to the sound of glass shattering. Heart racing, I sat up in bed, blinking in the dark. The mirror. I knew it before I even stepped into the hallway. I could feel it, like a heartbeat, pulsing in the walls. The mirror was broken, shards scattered across the floor. But in the middle of the glass stood a figure, tall and dark, shifting like a shadow made of flesh. It smiled at me, my reflection, no longer behind the glass, but standing in my home, dripping with something dark and sticky. I tried to scream, but the sound lodged in my throat as she moved closer, her smile splitting her face in two, wide and grotesque. "Come with me," she whispered, her voice like shattered glass. "Come be with him." I ran, but the house twisted around me, the walls groaning as they stretched and warped. I could hear her behind me, her footsteps quick and sharp, like the ticking of a clock. Closer, closer. Now I'm here, hiding in the attic, my back pressed against the cold wood. The whispers are louder, Dan's voice mingling with hers, calling me, telling me to give in, to join them. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. The door is creaking open, and the mirror is gone. I think she is too. I sit here looking at the blue painted walls with the same vintage movie posters I have had since I was 13. This room has been my comfort zone since I can remember. Living in the basement, I have always had a sense of independence, even at early ages. I could customize it to my design. I never let my parents' views bleed in here. I am a religious person, but I don't need a cross on every wall, proverbs on every mantle, and paintings of Christ everywhere in between. Down here I had freedom, but now it seems like this will be my tomb. I write this not only to get out the raving anxieties eating at my insides like a starved tiger, but to perhaps rationalize what is the completely irrational. My parents are the typical conservative Christian type, real Republican poster children. Growing up, my Sundays were completely haunted by 3-hour-long morning sermons from a pastor with eyes that wandered to a disturbingly downward. You would think my mom's eyes were on her chest if you even saw one conversation between the two. The rest of my early childhood ends up being a blur of Sunday studies and so many prayers that when I even see a plate of food being set on a table, not that I have for a long time, my hands reflexively go into a prayer without me even realizing it. Once I got a little older, around 16, I started to get sick of it. My friends would always post pictures of them at the beach on Sunday in bikinis that my mom would call an exorcist for if she ever saw me in. Through months of rolling eyes and dirty looks during Sunday service, my mom finally confronted me. "Are you questioning your faith?" she asked, coming into my room unannounced one night, a few months back. "No, Mom. I still believe in him. I just don't know why I can't have faith and do things my friends do at the same time," I responded, still hiding my true feelings. "Honey, on the day of judgment, we all must come to terms with our transgressions and make repent of our earthly sins. It is a fallen world, after all. Ever since the serpent tricked Eve in the garden, we have had to learn to coexist with our natural-born sin by..." she began. I knew another sermon was coming. I needed an out. "You're right, Mom," I said, putting my hand on hers, where she sat at the end of my bed. "I was just falling into temptation. I won't let it happen again, trust me," I said, with my best fake smile I could muster. "I trust you, sweetheart. You know I was once young too, believe it or not," she said, with a smile and a giggle, before getting up to kiss me on the forehead and saying good night. For the next few weeks, I just tried to keep a low profile, do my best to put on a happy face around the creepy pastor, but I slowly felt my faith slipping away. Service after service, I became more and more detached and began to seriously question who exactly my parents consider as their faith. Do they really believe in God, or is it just a helpful excuse to control my life further? Last week I had enough. On Sunday night, my friends texted me that they were going to a friend's house to smoke weed and hang out. Sundays are lockdown days. I am absolutely not allowed to see any of my friends all day, as it's reserved entirely for family and prayer. However, living in the basement grants some privileges, chief among which is my window. The screen door covers the window, but can easily be popped out of place. So around 11 p.m., after my parents were fast asleep, I snuck out and bolted to my friend's car, waiting for me in the alley behind our house. "Hey, choir girl," Ashley said, as I jumped in the back seat like I was fleeing the scene of bank robbery. "Drive. Get me the fuck out of here," I said, tapping her shoulder relentlessly. Once we pulled up to Ashley's friend Megan's house, she stopped, put the car in park, and grabbed a baggie with a joint out of her backpack. "If I'm gonna be in the room with Josh now that he and Megan are dating, I'm gonna need this," she said, fiddling with her lighter,
trying to get a spark, before taking a puff and handing me the freshly lit joint.
I have never smoked before, never even in the same room as someone who smoked cigarettes before. My immediate reaction was to say, "No, thank you," I said, waving my hand in the air. Ashley shrugged her shoulders. "Suit yourself," she said, taking another hit. We sat talking for a minute while she finished the joint.
"Your parents still running a dictatorship?" Ashley asked, after a brief moment of silence in the conversation. "Yeah, the older I get, the more they are convinced that whenever I'm out with friends, I'm worshiping the devil or having orgies with every guy in town," I responded, rolling my eyes.
"I mean, not on Sundays at least," Ashley said, before immediately bursting out laughing at her own joke. I laughed with her, and once we both caught our breath, I stared at what little weed was left in her joint. "You know what? I'm dead if I get caught regardless," I said, holding my hand out to accept the joint. "Look at my choir girl go," Ashley responded. "You can finish it, my treat."
I took one puff and immediately thought I swallowed an ember. My throat burned like a building on fire, and I coughed until my eyes watered, and I was gasping for air like a drowning man. Ashley laughed and said, "It's okay, you won't have virgin lungs forever." After coughing my way through the rest of the joint, we went inside. What little I remember mostly consisted of me being slumped on the couch, like a weighted blanket was draped over me, even though all I had was my hoodie and leggings on. When Ashley dropped me off a block from my house, I got out and tried to smell every part of me to make sure the weed smell had stayed in the car. As I turned the corner and saw the living room light on in my house, I felt the ground fall from beneath me. My heart raced so fast, I thought it would never stop. I spent the next 10 minutes walking back and forth, trying to think of what to do, until I decided that if I try to sneak back in through the window, maybe they won't notice. Walking to my backyard, I caught a glimpse of my living room, and my father was standing up in his pajamas, walking back and forth, talking on the phone. My mother was sitting on the couch, with tears running down her cheeks, crouched over in prayer. At that moment, I knew I was in trouble. My mom was in tears, and my dad was rubbing his neck out of stress, not looking far from tears either. After sneaking back into my window, I lay in my bed, waiting to either fall asleep or be yelled at by my parents. I ended up falling asleep. Nothing too unusual happened during my sleep. I didn't hear any strange noise or loud banging, but when I woke up, the stairs and door that led to the living room were gone. What was once my staircase, and the only way out other than my window, was just flat ground covered in the same hardwood. My floor was. Jumping out of bed, I ran to what now was solid ground, trying to make any sense of the situation. How do my stairs just disappear? How did this happen overnight? And how didn't I get woken up by it? An immediate sense of claustrophobia overtakes me. I feel the weight of a truck on my chest as I struggle for breath. I thought of my window, and before the thought fully registered in my mind, I had jumped on my bed and pulled on the window with every inch of my strength. It wouldn't budge, and with a horror I can't describe to this day, I noticed the window was welded shut. I immediately grab any item in reach and throw it at my window, eventually picking up my entire wooden nightstand and slamming it against the glass. It didn't even crack. I got at this for what may have been hours, Eventually, I collapsed out of exhaustion. The only thing I can do now is scream.
"Mom, Dad, help me, I'm trapped!" I shout until my voice breaks and tears fill my eyes like a bucket key in a hurricane. They didn't respond. No one came for me. My phone doesn't have service or Wi-Fi. I have a TV and old classic DVDs my dad owns, but that's it. No food, only water source is the sink in my bathroom. I spend the rest of the day pacing back and forth, intermittently screaming out for help until I notice a figure walking past my window. I jump up to the window and start banging on the glass like a caged chimpanzee. It's my mom. She's sitting on our backyard furniture, just staring into blank space. It looks like she has been crying for hours. Her eyes were blood red and tired. Her face was puffy and downtrodden. I bang even harder on the glass, screaming at her. "Mom, I'm here, please let me out." She doesn't even move a muscle. What the fuck is happening? Is she ignoring me? Can she just not hear me? There's no way she can't hear me. I'm screaming as loud as I can, and the windows aren't that thick. Did they do this? Is that why she's crying? What kind of twisted parents would do this to their own daughter? I remember laying in bed with these questions racing through my mind over and over. Once night fell, I was still trapped. I laid in bed, trying to sleep, hoping it was just a bad dream, or I would wake up and my stares would be back and everything would be okay. They made their point. I won't ever sneak out or touch weed again. With unimaginable dread the next morning, I woke up and my stares were still gone. I looked out my window again. Nothing? No one. Just the same patio furniture we have had since I was a toddler. I looked down and noticed all the clocks in my room, and even on my phone had stopped. They all froze like a lake in the winter at 3:33 in the morning. The only way I could tell time now was through sundown and sunrise. I tried screaming again. I screamed and I screamed until my vocal cords were about to snap like old brake lines. I'll never forget the panic, like coming out of a car crash. I knew I absolutely had to do something, but I was fighting in a world I didn't even understand. The threat I faced didn't even have any direct attack. It stood ominously in front of me. I can't quite describe it, but just seeing that blank wall in the corner felt like a figure staring me down at the edge of my bed at every waking second. My panic quickly turned into a blind rage. Thoughts of the physical and emotional pain I would subject my parents for putting me here drove me as I picked up my battered nightstand and flung it at the space my door used to be. Over and over with each crash against the wall, the nightstand breaking into smaller and smaller pieces, but the wall stood, not even a chip in the paint. I push my dresser over to the torturous space of nothing and start slamming the now scattered wooden pieces directly into the wall with all the strength I could muster. Nothing. I slumped down and caught my breath. There I sat, alone, trapped in the place I once found comfort in, but now see as a twisted prison cell, playing tricks on my psyche. For the rest of the day, I just laid in bed and watched some of the old DVDs I had on my shelf. The next day, I spent what I think was hours just looking out my window. It was fall now, when I became trapped. It was the middle of summer. How did it fast forward 2 months in a single night? My only perception of time was the daylight of my window. Had I really been in here that long? It seems every time I blink my eyes, I lose days. But is it really a loss? What kind of life am I living if I'm just a rat in a lab being experimented on by some demented god? From my perspective at the time of writing this, I have been down here for 25,430 sunsets. Not counting the first few nights, I wasn't keeping track. I'm not hungry, I'm not thirsty, and so much time has passed in my window that I don't even know the people in my backyard anymore. My parents died years ago, but yesterday, for me, I can't ask for help. I know better now. I have shouted, cried, broken every piece of art and furniture in my room, and the only change has been a chip in the paint size of my fingernail. This isn't over me smoking weed. I don't even know if this is my parents' doing. How could it have been? Ever since the night my stairs vanished, I haven't heard a single creak from upstairs. People walk past every day. What would they say if they learned the suburban home they just walked past has had a girl in the basement for over 60 years? For the first few nights I remember praying, but I now realize I was praying to my tormentor. If there is a God, he's forgotten me.